My name is Keith Fujishige. I'm with Risk Strategies. Full disclosure, I am on the Employee Benefits Department, so I have absolutely minimal idea what liability is. I have no idea why I got shanghaied into running this whole thing. The actual experts of all this thing are, we have John O'Neill on the side here, we got also Robert, who's with Risk Strategies as well, and we have a whole bunch of plant managers who are also very much there, and Chris Palmer also in this kind of thing. So we have a very exciting panel today. We're going to be talking about cyber liability. It's a pretty interesting, hot topic, as you might be aware of. Just yesterday, I saw two different articles, Berkeley talking about the big pushbacks from the professors because they're really rationing down on security and privacy. And then another article in the Wall Street Journal. Anyone know about the Internet of Things? Right, you've got the drop cam and the thermostats out there. Everything's interconnected. Pretty soon you're going to have refrigerators out there that can tell when you need a carton of milk and the butter and stuff like that. All that stuff is interconnected to the internet, and a lot of that stuff has a lot of security holes which are not really being addressed right now. So today we're going to talk about cyber liability. We're going to break this down into kind of three different areas here. Talk about the threat landscape, and we've got a great speaker to talk about that, talk about the regulatory side, and we're going to talk about pretty much how we can protect ourselves and things. So our first speaker we've got is Rahul. He is actually the Executive Vice President and the Chief Security Architect with Bromium. Bromium is a security company that is doing some really interesting things in different ways about protecting. So he's a pretty big expert in this. He actually worked over at McAfee. He's written a lot of different papers in terms of liability, in terms of security. He's talked about things as far as seminars, blogs, etc. So we're very excited about having him here. He's going to tell you how easy and how many different ways that your security that you're not even probably thinking about can get penetrated. It's frightening. When you see his slides, he gave me the slides, I was like, oh my God, I'm just going to shut down, become a Luddite, and move to Oregon and not deal with the internet at all. So it's kind of scary. We've got Tracy, who is with Wilson Sonsini. He's an attorney over there. Very excited to have her here. She's got extensive experience in the whole privacy area. Her specialization, actually, she worked with the Federal Trade Commission and spent a fair amount of time doing privacy and working with consumers and all those different types of things on specifically privacy. She's also written a number of papers, and her area of focus is in privacy, marketing, and dealing with all these types of things. So she's going to tell us what's going to happen when you get it's actually breached, and how much it's going to cost you unless you protect yourself for these types of things, and all the different types of things. One of the big things is reputational liability. That's one of those things that may not be as much of a financial dollar thing, but you're going to find here that California, a lot of the different regulations out there require you to notify. And so you might have seen last year. For me, on the side of that, it really was a big eye-opener was with Blue Cross. Last year, that was a huge thing. It just seemed like one thing after another. Blue Cross was having to say, yeah, we just lost 1 million, records of those types of things. Private health information. Then you got the government out there saying, we got people on our government side here that we got breached for. So she's going to talk about all the different things you have to. Patrick is actually with Chubb. He is their vice president over there in charge of their cyber liability and their general liability. He manages their East Coast. He's actually out here in lovely San Francisco right now. He's going to have to move out to the East Coast, so hopefully he'll be kind of the close for that to be able to deal with the weather. So, but he is managing that whole thing, and he's going to talk about the insurance side of things. So he's been with Chubb for 9 years, and we're excited to have him here. Last, we've got Rob Rosenwig, who is actually our cyber liability practice leader with Risk Strategies. So he's been doing this now for 9 years. He actually has a degree in the cyber liability and the liability side of things, so he'll be moderating for us. So, Rob?
Thanks so much, Keith. Super welcome. So, as Keith mentioned, we've got a great group of speakers today, so hopefully you won't hear a whole lot from me. But as Keith said, I'm Rob Rosenzweig. I run our cyber practice out of our New York office. I work with Risk Strategies clients across the country, making sure that they understand what the exposure is with respect to data breach and the loss of information, and working with them to both manage that risk and create customized solutions to transfer that risk off of their balance sheet to kind insurers like Chubb. We want to keep this interactive as possible. We've got 3 great speakers. They're going to come at this from some different angles, but I'm going to throw some questions at them as we go. They'll all step on each other's toes, and if you have a pressing question as well, we urge you to speak up and raise your hand, and I will try to take questions as we go. And with that, I will turn it over to Rahul to talk a little bit about the threat landscape and give us some insights from Bromium's 2015 threat report.
Do you want me to stand, or can you hear me okay? Okay, so just sit down then. Okay. So
before I want to talk about the whole cybersecurity trends, I kind of want to create some context about cybersecurity. Why is it a problem today, right? So I've been doing this for now almost 16 years, building companies, cybersecurity kind of to defend against attackers. So my background is offense and defense. So I go to conferences like Black Hat, I break software, and then I try to fix it. It kind of keeps me busy. You know, it's a good way to keep yourself busy, basically. So I think there are some very interesting moves in the last 5 years where cybersecurity has really emerged as a very serious threat, not just for the large organization, but also for the average home users, like across the spectrum, right? And if you look at it, it's actually very simple, the way I look at why is it so. You know, before we get into how it's happening, I will talk about a little bit about why is it happening this way. It's very simple, like today if I go out on the street and if I commit a crime, for example, there's a cop who will catch me and put me behind bars or will book me, right? So I'm accountable for my actions out here in a country, within the confines of the politics and so on of a region, right? But on the internet, there is no law. It's without any boundaries. I'm sitting in Ukraine, I'm building malware, I'm sending out spam. There is zero accountability, right? So no matter what I do, the risk and reward ratio is completely skewed compared to the normal dynamics of the societies we live in, right? So I believe that the way cybersecurity is right now and the lack of any accountability for the internet itself, this problem is going to get worse. It's going to get out of hand, and it is already beginning. I think this is just the beginning of what you're seeing, right? It's simple, right? I mean, if I have nothing to lose, I'm a high school dropout, why wouldn't I just sit down, play games in my Xbox, and have French fries and just hack people, right? I have nothing to lose, right? As simple as that, right? So and then on top of it, attribution is very hard. If I'm sitting in a country where there are no government treaties, no government agency can really catch me, right? So I can just go scot-free and I have nothing to lose, basically. So I believe that cybersecurity as a problem, even though we see artifacts of it, I think the fundamental problem is the lack of accountability on the internet, and this is something which is going to just get worse, just because from an attacker's point of view, there's nothing to lose, right?
Just to interject for something, and I should have said this to start, and Tracy will touch on the regulatory aspect here, but there's no going backwards. We all enjoy the conveniences that technology provides. Every business is trying to get as much information as they can on their customers, their potential customers, because there's value in that information. It's a valuable commodity. But to Raul's point, the criminals that don't have the accountability here, it's very easy for them to monetize that information, and that's where the bad actors are going. It's no more drugs and prostitution. It's how can we monetize information, just like reputable businesses.
Yeah. And in fact, there's an interesting study done, I think it was a couple of years back. There are cities in Europe where the crime in the streets has almost gone to 0% because the people are investing in cybercrime. You sit at home, it's less than bomb and just be with the computer, right? So exactly.
If you have to find a silver lining.
So talking about how it's happening, right? So I think in the last few years, how the threat landscape has changed is, I would say, the attackers are targeting users, right? And it's very simple, Human beings, all of us, we make mistakes, right? So I look at it this way: so if you have an organization of 1,000 people, that could be 10,000 people, right? And you just have the smartest people on the planet, and you just make one mistake a year, right? So you're making 1,000 mistakes from an organizational point of view, right, in a year, and that's all it takes from an attacker's point of view, right? It's a game of odds. So what they are doing is they're sending out what is called spear phishing and targeted like spam, which is the #1 attack vector. So all they will do is just send you an email, and you know what? Every user wants a free iPad. I don't know why. What's wrong with you? I keep on telling my dad, that's not a real iPad. But no, everybody wants a free iPad. I don't know why. So people will click on, human beings are gullible. They will make mistake, no matter what you do. You can train them. Yes, training can help, but sometimes an email can be disguised as coming from your boss, and it's really urgent, and you really have to click on it, right? So, and that's what the attackers bank on, right? And this is kind of the #1 attack vector. So what we found, like we just published a report. At the end of it, I can give you a link. You can, in fact, read the whole report yourself. Is pretty much the number one attack vector in the last few years is Adobe Flash, right? And Flash is there on every machine. They actually advertise that it's on every 1 billion machines have Flash. I'm like, oh god, 1 billion vulnerabilities. Open house. It's like an open house pretty much right now if you have Flash. It's probably one of the worst and the most affected of all the user applications, and it changes every year. Like 5 years ago, it was all about Java, right? If you had Java, you were number one. You were number one target from an attacker's point of view. There are too many vulnerabilities, right? It's just the maturity of the products. It's just that Flash is just horrible right now. I call, it's kind of joked in the cybersecurity world that Adobe Flash is a stimulus package for the malware industry. It's kind of a bad joke, but anyways, that's kind of all the malware last year was from Adobe Flash, pretty much, right? And typically, it's the productivity applications like your browsers, your email clients, your documents, which are the number one attack vector. Because most houses, people who have IP or something to hide, something to kind of protect, generally use applications like these. You go to the net, you go to your banking website, or you have a document which you are editing or working on collaborating with your friends or your colleagues, right? So these are the number one applications like Flash, browser, your various Office documents, and Java. These are all the number one attack vectors used by pretty much all the attackers right now. And all it takes is one click on one bad link, and the attacker is in. That's all it takes today. And that's how easy it is, right? And I don't know if you've heard about this. There was a team called the Hacking Team. Have you heard about this? This happened last year, the Hacking Team episode. So this was an underground group in Italy, and all they do was, work in the underground, and they used to write exploits for a living. So basically, the idea is there are governments and regimes and corporates who don't have the expertise in cyber hacking. So what you can do is you can actually hire hackers today, right? And all you have to do is just throw some cash, and you pretty much can target any individual or a group. And they had some pretty nasty stuff, which was they were using like all 0 days, which were undetected by pretty much any security vendor, right? So the idea is basically, there's always been this gossip and talk about the underground and how it operates. This hacking team, which unfortunately got hacked themselves, and they lost all of their exploits. Kind of a funny thing, right? So I don't know who did it. Probably some government who was just fed up of the cost of their exploits, I guess. I don't know what. But yeah, and what was found was actually fascinating. They had sold mass surveillance Trojans to oppressive governments, to corporates for launching espionage campaigns and stuff. It was just mind-boggling, the kind of stuff they had, right? So basically, the point is that if exploits are for sale, you don't have the skill, just throw some cash, and you can actually create malware targeted for a particular user or group or corporation. It's for everybody and anybody, pretty much. It's not just about the elite people who have the skills, right? And this is a very interesting trend. This is actually the scariest of the lot. So far, it was just fun stuff, right? So, which is basically this. So, the number one revenue-generating area in the internet today is online advertisement. Google completely depends on that, right? It's like a $200 billion industry in itself, right? And how ads work is they data mine you. They track you all the time. So if you visit to a website like CNN.com today or BBC, for example, there are close to 100 plus trackers and ad networks which are tracking you and profiling you all the time, right? It's pretty scary if you look at it from that point of view, because nobody's thought of CNN to be bad, but this is what happens when you go to a website like CNN today, right? It's all happening behind the scenes. So what the attackers have found is actually a very interesting sweet spot. So they know that nobody can blacklist CNN, or nobody can blacklist a popular website like Yahoo or Google, for example. So what they're doing is they're buying ads and launching malware via ads now, right? So all you have to do is, and it's not your fault, you're not even clicking on some random link, you're just browsing the internet right now, right? So recently I found a very interesting scam where Dictionary.com was compromised and they were launching malware, it's funny, we actually searched for this for the keywords polymorphic malware, and actually I got a real malware infection in that after that search from dictionary.com. It's kind of funny, right? So yeah, so this is kind of a very scary thing, because in this case you can't really blame the user. You're just going to the internet. It's just that fundamentally the attack surface, the amount of untrusted code is so huge on the internet that the attackers have a lot of leverage and they have a lot of variables to play with.
And do the ad networks not screen the ads for malware before, or they do, but it gets through?
So they do. So I actually reached out to Google. So when this happened, so we actually caught malware on YouTube. So one of our people in our office actually just went to YouTube a couple of years back. This happened, and he just got malware, and then we captured all of that artifacts in the malware. And I reached out to Google. I'm like, what's happening here? Right? Google, this is a kind of a serious problem, because YouTube, just by going to youtube.com, if I'm getting compromised, I don't know how many millions of users are getting compromised. And then actually, I published an article on Forbes as well about this. You can probably give you the link if you're interested. This is a very serious problem. So what is happening is the ads depend on RTB, called real-time bidding. So every second is money for them, right? So how it happens is that people bid on ads and on time, and this is all happening in real time, right? So they don't really have the time and the ability to really scan every ad and make sure that it's just a compute-powered problem, right? So attackers now have found out that they can just leverage this data-mined ad networks to launch ads. And actually, it gets even more interesting, because now you can buy AdWords for very targeted groups. So for example, we are here as a group today, and supposing we give a name for this conference. So I can buy the keyword for this conference and launch ad only for this group of people, because only one of us is likely to go to the internet and search for that keyword, right? So you can do very targeted campaigns on groups and individuals based on just ad networks. Pretty scary, right? This is the one which is actually on a rise right now, and most of the ads, most of the malware we are seeing in our sensors is actually coming from malvertisements. It's called malvertisement.
One quick question before you move on. So Keith mentioned the Internet of Things. Just given the ease of access to malware and how many bad actors are out there producing it, the sophistication of it, what about wireless endpoint devices, iPhones, iPads, Apple Watches? What's the effect on as we get into a society where we want convenience, we want these mobile devices, but the security is not the same as it might be on desktop or a server?
Yeah, that's true. Actually, we are going through a major transformation as a society. Earlier we used to live these private lives. We didn't want to talk about it. Now we want to share everything. Every time, every burger I'm eating, I want to share it on Twitter and say this is a great burger, or whatever. And it's kind of a weird thing, but yeah, it's a very transforming society. We want to suddenly share information, and then now devices are getting connected, right? So I think it's still early days from a malware point of view, because I would be very unhappy if somebody compromised my toaster and said, I can't really pop my bread, I don't know. I wouldn't be very disappointed by that. So the impact might not be as dramatic unless it's like my house, entire security system of my house is compromised, for example, right? So there are consequences depending upon the threat model and what you're really using.
But how about even with just, devices that we've used for business function, iPhones, iPads, especially as more and more companies go to a BYOD policy, bring your own device. Are there things businesses should be considering, just given some of the lack of control you might have if you have employees bringing their own devices onto your networks?
Yes. So this is a big concern, and I see about when I meet the CISOs in the large organization, this is the #1 concern for everybody. And in fact, one of the reasons why BYOD didn't really become a very big, it was supposed to become a very big theme in the organization, right? It didn't really take off that way because of security mainly, right? So from what I've seen so far, overall, I don't want to endorse Apple, but so Apple likes to control. They wanted to control the entire Apple iStore, Apple Store, and the iTunes model, and monetize that. But in the quest for that, they actually ended up getting a very good security model, and so that's kind of a very good model where I have seen very limited malware. Like your iPad is fairly safe compared to your Microsoft Windows, for example. But still, there's always a risk. There are jailbreaks and so on, but the threshold is fairly high. But in terms of Internet of Things, it's an emerging trend right now. I think we'll see this to emerge, probably, yeah, in the next few years.
Just quickly on bring your own device, we come from the insurance side of the house, so when we do evaluate mobile devices and what are the security standards in place for a company-issued device, a lot of the clients that we meet with have no standards if you're bringing your own device. So the encryption, the security software is just not there. So if you're looking about what information are we collecting, where is it, who has access to it, and obviously laptops, Blackberries, iPhones, etc. Just make sure that the security posture you have for your company-issued mobile devices is the same for the individuals that are actually bringing their own device, because you're seeing it more and more, particularly in healthcare and other industries where folks want to access your network from their home. So we're seeing that the security standards are not uniform across all devices.
Yeah, it's pretty fragmented. In general, the security industry is very fragmented, I agree. The lack of control, the lack of standardization actually makes it very difficult to really come up with a nice threat model, and how do you really decide which is better off, which is better. That's true.
From an insurance perspective, how do you underwrite that?
We'll,
I mean,
we'll dive into that in the
Okay.
insurance section.
We'll give you time to think about it.
I don't want to put Patrick on the spot.
Yeah, so I'll quickly go through this. So this is kind of, again, as social engineers, this is kind of, I'm talking about some real active scans which are actually happening. In fact, today morning I blogged about it before I came here. We found a very interesting scam from one of our very big retailers in New York City. They were hit, every user got this invoice, right, scam, and one click, and they had this macro malware, which was a very big campaign, and it was all traced back to some server back in Russia and Netherlands. So there are a lot of interesting ways, and these are all designed to bypass your network defenses. So your network defenses, whatever you had, are not good enough, basically, essentially, right now, the way it is. It's all designed to bypass. So quickly through this, yeah, so this is a very interesting scam. So most malware is designed to be evasive, stealth, and behind the scenes, right? So we came across this in the last 3 years, this is something called ransomware. Have you heard about ransomware? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right? So a lot of people have been actually hit by it. I was just talking about it. We actually talked about to a few people in the cyber police who were hit by it, and actually who had to actually pay money to the ransomware guys when they were investigating that scam. Kind of a bad situation to be in, right? So, but it's a very interesting place. How it essentially works is it plays with your psychology. So what it does is that you click on a link and you got infected, you won't know about it. It will encrypt everything that you have on your machine, and then say that it'll give you 72 hours and a clock saying that you have to pay me $300 to $1,000 depending upon the kind of stuff that got encrypted in this much time, or else you lose everything. It's like a classic ransom. You're actually held hostage, right? And a lot of people actually pay for that. It's a very lucrative business, to the point where there are underground gangs in Russia which are actually competing to build a better ransomware right now, right? They have made millions of dollars in the last few years just by this scam. So this is something very active, something I would really advise you to watch out for. I have come across scenarios where terabytes of entire, the entire share of a company was encrypted by ransomware, and they didn't have backups. They pretty much had to. I heard some pretty bad stories about this actually. So something to really watch out for. The next thing is actually the attackers are also getting better. They're getting more innovative. So what they do is that the McAfees and Symantec of the world, the antivirus is used as a test case. So it's being used for QAing malware. You QA your malware so that you make sure that there is no signature, so you get a better chance of success. There's something called pay-per-install, which means that only if you install malware successfully, you will get paid. Otherwise, you won't get paid. So the entire model of malware has moved to the cloud, and it's SaaS-based right now. Almost like it's like a parallel software economy. So where it's on the cloud and it's completely encrypted, and they test out their malware and based on where you want to target people, and then they measure how successful they are, and only based on the success rate they actually get paid. So the attackers are highly motivated to write malware which bypasses your existing defenses, right? And Bitcoin has become the favorite currency right now for all of these exchanges, because it's anonymous, pseudo-anonymous, and and now everything is on over Tor network, which is completely, it's like a tunnel, completely encrypted, basically, difficult to find out what's going on. So yeah, money laundering is a very big thing in the malware world, because how you what you do with the money. So Bitcoin conversion is actually is a very big thing. It's funny, if you go to 7-Eleven in Mexico, you can buy buy anything using Bitcoins. It's kind of an odd thing, kind of convenient as well. But yeah, I think Bitcoin is the #1 money laundering scheme. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think there's a lot more details. I have a detailed report if you want to follow the trends. I kind of went over the high-level summary of what we have been seeing. There's a lot more interesting stuff. Some of it is actually scary. Yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me even after the panel discussion. But the idea is to kind of to summarize: attackers are innovating. Malware is just software. There's a parallel economy working next to all of us, and they are motivated. They are investing more and more money and resources, and this is going to get more and more sophisticated as we approach in the next 2 years.
Oh,
So-
one quick question for you before we move on. I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but could you spend just a couple minutes talking about the dark web and how these bad actors are actually monetizing the information when they aren't successful?
So that's where the whole money laundering scenario actually works, right? So typically, right now the favored currency is Bitcoins, and it depends. So there are a few large organizations who actually run most of the cybercrime syndicates. It depends whom it falls into. Some of it actually goes into drugs. Some of it goes into just Bitcoin exchange into cash, hard cash. But yeah, the whole dark web, as it's popularly referred, is basically run by very, very sophisticated cyber criminals right now. And in terms of exchange of money, I think there are several hand exchanges. It is very well designed so that you can never reach to the real source, where who's writing malware. There are several exchange of hands, always, all the time. So you will never know who's the guy who made the real malware. Actually, the guys who make the real malware don't make a lot of money. It's the middlemen who make most of the chunk of the pie, because they take the highest risk, because they are more exposed than the guys who are writing the malware.
But it's truly if you ever have an opportunity to see a demonstration of the dark web run by somebody qualified like Rahul, they're spoofs of websites like Amazon and eBay, and it's truly a legitimate economy. It's you go on and say, I'm in the market for credit cards, and there's a list of vendors and got the reviews. Oh, they always deliver their credit card numbers promptly, and the numbers are accurate. It's a legitimate economy.
And the pricing is interesting, right? If
Yeah.
the market is saturated with debit or credit cards, then they can be canceled versus a healthcare record, which is more complete. You can use that to do more things. So one might have a dollar value versus one is 50. So it's interesting the different prices falling and
Yeah.
raising based on the amount of supply that's out there.
So with that, now that Rahul's sufficiently scared all of us, we'll hand it over to Tracy to talk about why companies can't really ignore this issue when they have these incidents, why you can't sweep it under the rug.
So I'm going to talk about the legal risks, give you kind of a sense of what regulatory agencies are involved in this space, and what you can do to mitigate the risks. So the regulatory market has become quite saturated in the data security space also. The main enforcer is the Federal Trade Commission. Those are the cases you've probably heard the most about. They've been bringing these cases for the past 15 to 20 years, and have brought about 50 cases since then. And we're now seeing a lot of these industry-specific agencies getting into the mix. So if your company is in a sector that's regulated by a specific agency, there's also a risk that they could bring a data security enforcement action. So FDIC, SEC, FCC, and HHS have had an increasing interest in this area. We've also seen the states getting really interested in data security. A lot of states have enacted over the past few years data security legislation, so the state AGs have the ability to enforce those laws. So the FTC, how they bring these actions is they have a statute called Section 5 of the FTC Act, which is incredibly broad. They've had the statute for 100 years, and it prohibits deceptive and unfair practices. So we don't have any federal data security law that you can look to in the US to say, you know, what is required and what does my company need to do. So instead, the FTC has been sort of creative using the statute, and they've brought deception actions, which is companies said they were going to do something in terms of security and they didn't do it. So sometimes it's general security representations like we're going to protect your data, you know, it might be in the marketing materials, it might be in your privacy policy, and sometimes it's really specific representations like we're going to encrypt all sensitive data in transmission, and then you don't. When they don't have a kind of a deception hook, there's no language that you violated, they often bring an unfairness action, which is where they allege that a company failed to employ reasonable security measures to protect your data, and that resulted in consumer injury. So again, a really broad standard. And just one important point is that they are increasingly bringing cases where you've had no data breach. For the first 10 years or so, we tended to see these types of enforcement actions where it was a large company, there was a large breach that was in the papers, millions of consumers affected, and then the FTC would bring an enforcement action. Increasingly, things are happening like security researchers will be doing some research and they learn about a vulnerability at a company, a white hat hacker finds something and does a blog post, and the commission gets wind of it, and companies are finding themselves under consent orders without ever having actually experienced a breach. So a lot of our clients just take comfort in the idea that, you know, as long as we don't have that big breach, then we're okay, but we're kind of out of that territory. So as I said, it's a really broad standard, an obligation to implement reasonable security. So what does that mean? So there have been kind of a few main enforcement trends that we've seen over these past 50 cases. The high-level categories are failure to address well-known vulnerabilities, failure to implement reasonable security measures, and in circumstances where there's a risk of consumer injuries. So on the failure to address well-known vulnerabilities, just a couple of examples are cross-site scripting attacks and SQL injection attacks. Those are just common vulnerabilities. The FTC has talked about them. They've brought enforcement actions where companies had breaches as a result of failure to address those vulnerabilities. Another is allowing your employees to, or not preventing your employees from installing peer-to-peer software on your network that results in information being uploaded out onto the internet. So those are just a couple of examples, but the point is where there are vulnerabilities that are out there, security researchers know about them, everyone's talking about them, and your company doesn't address them, the commission will allege that that is a failure to implement reasonable security. Similarly, on the failure to implement reasonable security measures, there are a whole bunch that they've talked about in these past 50 cases where they said if you don't do these things, you're violating Section 5. So a failure to assess security risks, to establish security policies, a failure to limit network access or segregate access roles by employee, transmitting sensitive data in clear text, not changing default passwords, not following incident response plans and procedures when you have a breach, not implementing network segregation, failure to train your employees on security matters. These are all the kinds of things that the FTC will be looking at when they bring an action to say, did you have these in place? And if you had, might that have prevented the breach? And then finally, they looked whether or not there was some risk of consumer injury. It's not always required for them to bring a case, but they tend to bring cases where there's some financial loss, health information loss, or risk of identity theft. And I will mention on the Internet of Things point, the FTC is very interested in the Internet of Things. They've hosted conferences and issued a report on that, and they have brought an enforcement action against a home security network that had home security cameras / baby monitors that they didn't properly protect the transmission. And a hacker got a hold of them and posted thousands of live streaming videos of things going on in people's homes. So as you can imagine, there was all sorts of compromising activities that were on the internet. So that company ended up under an FTC order. So what are the consequences? What happens when you end up under one of these orders? It's not fun. We describe it as kind of going into government, going into business with the government for the next 20 years. They are your new partner. The orders are 20-year orders. They require you to implement a comprehensive information security program, which I'll talk a little more about. The big bummer, they require 20 years of biennial independent third-party audits. So you're required to bring in an outside security firm, have a comprehensive audit of your company done, and then you have to submit a copy of that report to the commission. And you tend to get lots of follow-up questions from them. There's also potential financial penalties as a result of the case, and then if you violate the order at any time after that for the next 20 years, there's high risk of large financial penalties.
Tracy, would you mind just spending a minute and just, I think it's interesting, the Wyndham FTC dispute and
Sure.
what impact that might have on businesses going forward?
Sure. So of the 50 investigations that they've brought and settled, they brought 50 and settled them. Two companies challenged them and said, no, we're not interested in entering into this consent order with you, and we're going to litigate. So one of those cases, LabMD, is ongoing. Another one was Wyndham, the hotel chain, and they said, we're not going to settle, and they litigated. And one of their main arguments was the FTC doesn't have the authority to regulate data security. That, Congress passed this law 100 years ago prohibiting deceptive and unfair practices, and that does not give you the authority to determine what is reasonable security and to bring enforcement actions against companies for this. And that there's this vagueness around that. What does that mean, reasonable security? How are we supposed to follow the law when you're issuing this really vague standard that is meaningless to us? So the district court judge shot down that argument. She said, no, the FTC does have authority under Section 5, and they have given sufficient guidance through these consent orders, through small business guidance that they put out. So that definitely emboldened the FTC. I mean, there was always a question of, do they actually have the authority to do this or not? So now there is one district court who has said that they do. So we can expect to see many more data security cases coming from them as a result. So let's see, what else? So there are other legal risks other than the FTC. In addition to the other regulatory agencies, and I mentioned the states, Congress likes to get involved when there's been usually a large breach. They, of course, don't have any enforcement authority, but their favorite thing is to send inquiry letters, and if it's very high profile, to drag your CEO up to the Hill and make him or her testify. So, even if you end up being not liable for a breach, if you are responsible at your company for having made the CEO go to Congress and get drilled all day long, it doesn't usually end well. And then Congress also refers a lot of cases to the FTC, so if there was some kind of a breach in their district, they often refer it on to the commission.
One thing to point out here, and we'll get into this a little bit more, I assume, in Patrick's slides. Of the 47, this isn't just a big business issue when the FTC is getting involved and Congress is getting involved. The states are very active in this space. We joke that this is really the fastest way for a state attorney general to become governor is to bring a lot of these reg actions. But just to clarify, with the 47 states that have laws in place, where your business is domiciled does not dictate what laws you're beholden to. It's where the individuals whose information is in your care, custody, and control reside that dictate your response. So your business may be domiciled in California, but if you're transacting business with customers in all 50 states in the country, you have to understand what the laws are in place in those 47 states to dictate how you have to respond. And the laws differ. There's vast differentiation in the laws, as you might imagine. California being a very consumer-friendly state, what's considered personal identifiable information is different than what you might see in other states. In California, it's as little as email and a password, where in other states it's what you'd expect, name, social security, account numbers, birth dates, things of that nature. How much time you have to respond and what you have to do all differs from state to state.
Right, so when you have a breach, if it's nationwide, rather than let's just write a letter and send it out to our consumers, it's a very detailed analysis of in what states do we need to give notice and what states do we not. Some states have requirements that you notify the AG, others don't. There may be a federal law at some point coming, but not anytime soon. And aside from the regulators, there are also very large class action risks. So with almost every big breach, you see a consumer class action filed shortly thereafter. Shareholder lawsuits are becoming more common, and class actions by banks and financial institutions are becoming more common, and they're having success. So banks, for example, can bring lawsuits saying, you know, we had large costs from having to cancel and reissue all of our cards, or for fraudulent payments that appeared on the card, and hold the company responsible for that.
Is everyone familiar with EMV technology, the pin and chips and credit cards? So as of October, the payment card industry has essentially said if you have a breach and you're not using EMV technology, the liability is all on you as the retailer transacting business. So there's been a big shift in that space as well.
So how do you mitigate? Establish a comprehensive information security program. I'll kind of run through that. Develop a company-wide strategy. We really encourage companies to deal with this at a high level rather than having departments deal with it in an ad hoc manner. Either having your internal experts do assessments and identify risks, or bringing in outside consultants, and then, of course, insurance. We'll talk more about that later. So this is the FTC's standard for an information security program. I won't run through it all, but you've got it in your slides. But basically, you need to have something written. So it isn't enough to have really great practices in place. It also needs to be documented. When you have a breach, the first thing when the FTC comes is they're going to say, provide us a copy of your information security policy. And if you have to say we don't have one of those, it doesn't start out well. It should contain administrative procedures, technical and physical safeguards. And then here I've just laid out some of the elements that you can run through. Number one, have an employer or employees who are in charge of the program. That's the second question the FTC asks you. Who's in charge of security? And if you can't answer that, it doesn't go well either. So the others are conduct a risk assessment, identify your holes from the risk assessment and put in safeguards to address them. Number four is increasingly important, overseeing your service providers. So, companies used to take the position that if they have, shop something out to vendors, then they don't need to worry about the security because the liability is gonna fall on them. That is not the case. The commission has brought cases against companies saying you didn't do the right diligence in selecting your vendors. You should have looked into this and known that they weren't capable of providing the level of security that's necessary for the level of sensitivity of the data that you're giving to them. You should have been monitoring them, you should have been auditing them, and they will hold you responsible.
That's a great point. Does anybody know how Target was penetrated?
Yeah. Penetrated by the AC vendor who didn't change the password on his laptop. And he had direct admin passwords inside of his network.
And Target housed their HVAC systems on the same server that they did their point of sale system. So you're really only as strong as your weakest link.
And lastly, that you should be reevaluating this program and adjusting it. It's not enough to have it and then tuck it away in a drawer. The security threats change every day and the information you collect changes, and so you need to be constantly evaluating it and updating it. And here I've just listed some of the key policies and procedures that companies tend to implement for an information security program. And with that, we will move on to insurance.
About 10 minutes about insurance, so please don't fall asleep. I'm very sensitive, my feelings will be hurt. I think we all understand there's more targeted attacks happening, there's more breaches, there's more reporting of breaches. The cost associated with breaches is going up. The regulatory pressure is fairly heightened right now. Some choose to self-insure the exposure. If you want to partner with an insurance company, I'll just give you a sense of the market, the landscape, who the major players are. AIG, Beasley have a significant portion of the market currently. I referenced the new Chubb here because it's the combination of ACE and Chubb. ACE acquired Chubb and the transaction went through several weeks ago. So with that combined, new Chubb, it's about 13% of the market. Estimate the market's around $2-3 billion, with plenty of room to grow, about $5 billion in the next 5 years. The industries you hear about, the class of business that are on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, very significant breaches, is really FI, retail, healthcare. Then there's everybody else, right? So you hear about the big boys, the Home Depots of the world, but we write all sizes of business, all classes. So we have considerable amount of activity with small mid-market clients. Now, they may be buying for different reasons. The Home Depots of the world are probably trying to buy a very significant tower for that rainy day, right? They may have policies and procedures in place to respond, and they may not want to or need to lean onto an insurance company or a broker to assist in the service component, so risk management and responding to an actual breach. You contrast that with smaller mid-market clients that typically have smaller towers, 1, 3, 5 million limit, but don't know what to do in the event of a breach, right? So we touched upon the different state notification laws. Likely they're not prepared to respond in all 47 states. If you do partner with an insurance company or your insurance broker, we've handled so many situations that we can coordinate the actual response to a data breach and help hopefully minimize the chance of a third-party liability claim coming in on the back end. It's challenging when you're looking at different insurance companies because there's not a standard way to approach a policy form. All the terminology is different, right? The way it's triggered on the third-party side and the first-party side is different. So to just look at all these insurance companies in a spreadsheet and boil it down to price, limit, retention, probably not the way to go. You want to lean on your insurance professional or broker to understand really what you're getting and what you're hoping to accomplish by purchasing a program. I'll give you just a general outline of some of the coverage grants that you'll see out there. We'll start with first party. All right, so the data breach expenses or crisis management fund, you hear that those terms being thrown out, is the actual response to a data breach. So likely no one sued you yet, but there's been a release of sensitive information, whether that's a hacking event, a lost laptop, an email going in the wrong direction, it really doesn't matter. And that's the actual response. So bringing in a law firm to consult, also act as the project manager and coordinate the response. Forensics firm to come in and figure out if your network's been compromised, if so, what information was actually accessed. Determine if you have to notify the impacted individuals. You have to bring in vendors to handle the notification. Provide credit monitoring or fraud consultation services. So all these, you likely have not been sued yet, cost a considerable amount of money, right? If you don't have a plan in place, if you haven't partnered with vendors, a breach happens and you're scrambling, likely your response is not going to be very coordinated. You're probably going to be paying rates that are significantly higher than you were to partner with an insurance company, right? We have leverage in that area and can pass that along to our clients. Other first-party coverage, digital recovery loss. So electronic data that's corrupted or destroyed as a result of a breach. You'll pay to get that information back. Business interruption and contingent business interruption. So your network is down and you can no longer transact business. So the lost income, that first-party loss during the down period. And it's typically a waiting period. So if you're down for 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever, it'll kick in after that outage and pay for the lost income. Contingent business interruption, similar, but third party. So you're relying upon a vendor or a service provider's network to be up and running in order for you to transact business. Your first party loss if that vendor or partner is down. The crime, which you're seeing more of it now, cyber extortion. So someone gets in your network and threatens to shut you down or release sensitive information unless you pay some kind of ransom. All right, you see a higher exposure with companies that perhaps have a seasonal spike in business. And so 1-800-Flowers right before Valentine's Day. If you've put off getting your significant other a bouquet of flowers, they know that there's a spike in business, so their network needs to stay up during that time period. We see a higher exposure for those type classes of business. Deceptive funds transfer, so you're duping someone into transferring funds to the wrong recipient, and you have a first-party loss as associated with that. What we're trying to prevent, right? So what we're trying to do is respond appropriately to prevent this third-party liability. So privacy liability would be you're sued for the loss of personal information, really in any format. All right. The network security liability would be a failure of your network, such as a denial of service agreement. Right? So someone gets in your network, someone sues you as a result of that. The internet media liability really has to do with the content on your website or other electronic media. So you use an image that you don't have the rights to use. Intellectual property issues as a result of that. And technology E&O is really where you see the cyber was born out of. E&O products, so technology companies that are transacting business online, common to see the cyber coverage grants as a part of that. Any questions on the coverage grants?
I think maybe it would be a good time, unless you were planning on touching on it later, the gentleman in the front, the question, just how do you underwrite this? We've talked, this isn't just a technology issue, it's people, processes. What are you looking at? How is it priced?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? The market is not as mature as some of the more traditional lines of business, right? So we don't have hundreds of years of data to rely upon. So it's really an arms race of all the insurance companies fighting, trying to gather as much usable data as possible to figure out by class of business, by size of organization, where the claims are coming from, how much they're costing, and underwriting to a specific class of business. Generally speaking, there's always exceptions. You're looking at the size of the organization, how large they are, what class of business they're in, retail versus construction, right? There's going to be significant differences in terms of exposure. The regulatory environment, so what standard they're held to, and ultimately the number and type of records that they have, right, to give you a sense of the exposure base. And then to separate the good from the bad, where is that information? Who has access to it? How well controlled is it? You're trying to predict these things, so you're seeing the insurance company gathering up this data as fast as they can. And predictive modeling or data analytics is becoming more a part of that pricing. As we mature, as we pay more claims, we try to have a more fact-based decision. But you're really trying to see the culture of the organization. Do they get it? Do they invest money in it? Are senior leaders owning it? Right? And the policies and procedures tested? And that's great, but is it also drilled down into the employee level? Right? So is there overall awareness to the field level, the folks on the ground? We talked about the EMV shift to chip and pin. So now when you purchase something, you have the option to put the card in the hardware. It'll read the chip. You can also swipe it, likely, on those same hardware devices. A lot of times, the individual at the point of sale will just take your card and swipe it because it's faster. Are they trained on chip and pin versus the actual magnetic strip? Are they forced to put the chip in? Little things like that could be the low-hanging fruit for your organization, despite very firm controls and procedures in place. So,
But all that's part of your analytics when you underwrite.
yeah. So you hear complaints from some clients that the underwriting process can be cumbersome, right? And we get that, but we're trying to do our best to understand the exposure, number one, and how you're protecting yourselves to prevent against these situations, to separate you from another organization, same size, same class of business, that's not as prepared.
And then what level of protection would your insureds receive? Like say you're a wealth management firm, relatively small in personnel, probably larger in
Right.
AUM, what's at risk, but you have the custodian, you have the investment managers. We could have our stuff buttoned up, we think, but then there's outside risk. So where do you attach the risk?
So just, a couple points there, and then we'll just get back to the slides to just finish up. We've got a few minutes left. Tracy mentioned the vendor issue, and the way the laws are written and the way the insurance marketplace has responded to this. If you have an incident, whether it's your vendor's negligence, whether you store data in the cloud, you use someone to process that information, a clearinghouse to process trades, if they're negligent, but it was your customer information, it's your problem. So the insurance policies, Chubb's included, respond and provide you that protection. So to Patrick's point just about the leverage that you get with having the vendors by buying the insurance, what we find particularly with small and middle market businesses, you don't necessarily have somebody like Tracy on retainer. You don't know a forensics firm to come in and help respond and understand what the situation was. So sure, the reimbursement for the money is great. That's why we're buying this ultimately, to transfer that risk off our balance sheet. But it's really access to that tiger team of vendors. Through the policy, you now have vendors on retainer.
Yeah, so it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? You're trying to build a large program, you feel like you have an infrastructure in place to respond, or to Rob's point, are you looking more lower limit, which is common for a first-time buyer or a new buyer that doesn't have this in their overall insurance budget, but you want more out of it. What I'm about to get into right now, a more comprehensive cyber program. So where it started, where it was born, was just we're going to cut the check if there's a loss, right? And it was fairly narrow in its infancy. It really just had to do with hacking events and third-party liability. you saw the first-party component become more robust. But when you're selecting an insurance company, there's a couple things you want to look out for. You want to make sure that you're getting more than just risk transfer, which has evolved over the years, but there's some sort of response. So in the middle, some sort of data breach team or selection of vendors that can assist in the actual response to a breach. So for smaller and middle market clients, the frequency is on the first party side, actually responding to the breach. Hopefully it's not significant enough where a third party situation has been triggered. And if we're able to manage this process effectively, take care of the impacted individuals, interact with the regulators that may be sniffing around this situation, hopefully we can minimize the chance of a claim coming in on the back end. So make sure there are options here, right? In a second, we're going to talk about forensics and how expensive that's getting. Make sure you have options in the forensics world, right? Some forensics firms may want to come in, 20 people in your location and work for 3 weeks and charge $500,000. Others may want to do it remotely. It can cost significantly less. Some may want to handle healthcare versus retail, the large breaches versus a small one. Have that dialogue with your broker or your insurance company, because every vendor or panel member may not be perfect for every situation. So have it in place, but have options and be a part of that discussion. The next evolution was at the top with loss mitigation or risk management, right? So we have all this data. We partner with vendors that assist in responding, but the feedback from our clients was, we want to work with you to prevent the breach from actually occurring. So by industry, where we track where claims are coming from, we in turn have risk management solutions, and you'll see this in the market, that can partner with clients to hopefully prevent a situation from actually happening. So a more comprehensive approach, not to work against your IT or risk management, but to work in conjunction with that. Here's the claims from our entire book. Right? So I know we're pressed for time, but a couple of quick takeaways is when we sit down with clients, a lot of them, we talk network. Not everything is hacking, right? This is only 29%. And there are a lot of other areas outside of IT or outside of your control. A rogue employee that was demoted, let go, on their way out, releases sensitive information, lost or stolen device. Human error.
It seems to me you tally human error, lost stolen device, and rogue employee. That's significant majority.
And these are the killers, right? You spend all this time and money investing in your network, investing in your policies and procedures, and an employee sends an email to the wrong person. And here we go, right? So to look at this coverage or this exposure and put your head in the sand and say, we're buttoned down, it can't happen to us, that's just not the case, right? So just understanding by your industry where you feel you're more exposed and looking at ways to try to prevent it and try to partner with people that have done this for a considerable amount of time is critical.
And this data is from actual Chubb Insurance, so you've been writing this product?
So this is where we're actually spending money. And when you're interacting with an insurance company, make sure we can break it out by industry. We hear about Target and Home Depot. That might not be relevant for all of you in this room, right? So if you're in the healthcare field, you see that hacking is just less component of where we're actually paying loss. We're seeing rogue employee, loss of stolen device, human error, what have you. So important to drill down and by industry.
So I have a question regarding individuals, because you talk about an employee or just normal person. If you send a document that has virus or Trojan, can you be liable on it? And does umbrella insurance insure this type of risk?
So that's what the third-party component that Patrick was mentioning in the beginning, the network security component. If another organization's compromised and it was due to your negligence, they can trace that back to you. You have liability in that matter. So yeah, that company that was hacked, they're going to have to respond to the incident, but then they're going to come after you because now they've spent all this money on forensics and so forth, and they're going to want to recoup that loss.
So individuals should be protected on their own personal insurance for that type of.
For your personal liability, the hope would be your employer's indemnifying you there. We're still sort of seeing an evolution in the insurance marketplace for how this impacts individuals.
Right. And protection for the entity. as a result of a failure of network security. If your information gets out, they're gonna try to make you whole by credit monitoring, what have you, but your scenario would be third-party network security, which is complicated.
So Patrick, in California, can you just touch on, I know that I was a Blue Cross Anthem, and I got a letter that said, your information may or may not have been compromised, but we're gonna buy a credit monitoring service. So we have people from a variety of industries, real estate owners, fraternal organizations, garbage collection. If their information is compromised, whether it's third party or their own employees that maybe they have on system, legally, what do they have? Do they have to buy credit monitoring?
Well, there's no statute associated with credit monitoring, it's a standard and a best practice, and then it raises the question, is that really an effective way to mitigate risk, right? You offer credit monitoring, what would that do? The person's gonna have to have information that can be used to open up a line of credit. Credit will have to go south, and then an alarm bell will go off. So we've done more than that. We've done fraud consultation, identity restoration. We're partnering with a company now to work with individuals to have their passwords at a higher level and constantly reevaluate their passwords. The interesting part is the take-up, when we offer credit monitoring, the actual take-up is only 4 or 5%.
Well, because in some instances it's meaningless, right? I mean, if it's a credit card breach, you call your bank, you get a new credit card, there's really no issue there. But it's become the norm for Patrick.
But if it's a health thing where they might have my social
Then it's a
security
whole
number,
different
they
ballgame.
might have all sorts of things.
Right, so in that scenario, we would offer health ID monitoring, but it's evolved. Credit monitoring in itself is not enough, right? So you're seeing an evolution of offering more things to the impacted individuals to hopefully make them whole. But then also, if it gets into a liability situation, look, we did what we could to protect it. It got out, but here's what we did about it. We had a plan in place. We engaged an attorney. Not an attorney we use for our employment practices. A cyber attorney does this all day, every day.
I think the short answer to your question is it depends. I mean, the best part about the policy is you get somebody like Tracy who understands the laws, and they're gonna come in, based on your situation and what you believe the information that's gonna be compromised, they're gonna give you some guidance. Is it gonna be bringing a forensics firm to really see what data was compromised? But from there, they're gonna help you be in touch with the regulators, craft those messaging to make sure that you're showing remorse but not admitting any liability. It's a delicate game.
Exactly, it depends, right? But you got people in place that do this all day, every day, right? So they can hopefully be nimble.
Before we take that last question, I just want Patrick to hit on, he has one more slide which talks about some of the costs, which I think will be good, and then we can take some more questions.
Sure, so to wrap it up, this is the cost on the first party side of the house, so the actual breach response. There's been a shift over the years. Initially, a lot of the money was spent on notification and credit monitoring. What you've seen is the cost of notification come down. So we work with the various state AGs and try to figure out ways to provide substitute notification, whether that's posting something on the internet or sending emails out. And you also work with vendors to control that cost. What is on the rise is the forensics, right? So there's more targeted attacks. The networks are becoming larger and more complex. The bad guys, when they do get in, are doing a really good job of covering up their tracks, right? So that process is getting fairly costly, which is why I stressed having choice, having flexibility when you're working with an insurance company about who you're going to use for what scenario, whether it be large or small, and based on the type of breach.
And just to be clear, I assume these are costs based on the leverage that Chubb has with these vendors. This isn't your insurance calling up and saying, my house is on fire, I need
Right.
somebody to come put the work.
Right, so typically, a lot of clients or prospective clients approach us post-breach. So they had a situation, a lot of information's gotten out, they're getting called in front of their board to explain what happened, what are you doing about it, were you prepared, how's the plan going, and they're, oh man, we don't have a plan, so the cost goes through the roof, right? And there's no one on top acting as a project manager to make sure that everything's going smoothly, everyone's working in concert with one another. And obviously, just the basic math of the rates are higher.
I mean, it's a safe assumption that if this was not insured, these numbers would be some multiple
Right.
above where they are.
Good point, these are all insured breaches. Any questions, thoughts?
Yeah, so, I mean, as you're about to underwrite a policy, you're probably seeing opportunities to educate your clients.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's win-win for both sides. The
Exactly.
more they actually know how to prevent breaches.
Sure.
So are you offering that and,
Yeah.
or you?
Yeah, so what we stress is the the application is a good starting point, right? It's drilling down into key areas where we're seeing losses. So we have a dialogue about that. And the evolution of the quote-unquote service component is risk management or loss mitigation services. So these same vendors that we partner with to respond to the breach, you're seeing more markets put them in place to actually prevent loss.
So-
So they're coming to us for a full, full
Patrick's
range.
being a little bit modest. I mean, I think the thing I'd say is it's important to rely on your broker because there is still a lot of variation in terms of the insurance companies that are underwriting this. So we're starting to see the trend more towards that, but Chubb's a great example. They've partnered with these vendors, and if you're a Chubb policyholder, you can pay $3,000 for a great service that you'd pay 3 times that if you weren't a Chubb insured. But not every insurance company does that. So it's important to understand what your priorities are and make sure that you're partnering with the right insurance company that can provide those services, and you can leverage that to make sure you're getting the most for your money. And also on the response component, the one thing I'd say too, it's also important to understand what your priorities are there organizationally too. Do you have vendor relationships? Do you want choice? Do you want flexibility? Because there are insurance companies out there that will say, if you have an incident, just give us the keys to your car. We'll deal with it and we'll tell you when it's done. Where there are carriers that will truly partner with you, and if you have pre-existing vendor relationships, they'll consider those, but perhaps they'll simply incentivize you to use their vendor relationships by giving you additional limit if you do that, or lowering your deductible if you do that. So these are all important considerations and a dialogue that should be going on when you're thinking about how you're going to transfer that risk.
It just seems like prevention is the best medicine.
It's a win-win for everyone. Yeah.
And so the more you can do to just kind of lock down
Yeah.
things better, and there's a lot that you can do that a lot of middle-sized companies probably don't even realize.
Right, right, and it's a direct reaction to where we're spending money on the claim side,
Okay.
right? And
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
some
yeah.
things that you talked about phishing emails. Right, we ran it at our own company where we had a vendor we partnered with send out a fraudulent email to 100 people. The take-up rate at an insurance company was 75%.
Wow.
Right? And you bring it to
You
a
think
training.
they would know, you know?
Right, you bring it, we're not that smart. No, well, I'm very smart. But then you look at, they bring you to a training module and they explain, hey, here's some things that you should have watched out for, you should have known. Right? And then they run the phishing scam again, and it went down to like 25%.
Still not
Something that
good,
seems,
yeah, but,
it
but
seems
it's-
silly, it seems like low-hanging fruit, but sometimes the employees can be the weakest link to get into the
Yeah,
network. So that's just an easy, inexpensive way to create awareness and get all the employees involved, not just the board.
Yeah, yeah.
So want to be mindful of everyone's time. I know we've been taking questions throughout, but if there are 1 or 2 questions, we can take them now, and I'm sure all of us will be happy to chat one-on-one afterwards if you have any other questions as well.
I have one. Do you have a resource that can do a small 10-minute, 20-minute presentation to employees about how to not be a sucker and how to know the difference between a bank phishing scam versus some other thing?
Yeah, I mean, there's some education that we can provide around that, and then also if there is, insurance is a component of how you're transferring and managing that risk. It's like I was saying to the woman in the front, it's about leveraging those resources that we can get for you for free. So with an insurer like Chubb, there are resources where we can get you some of that education without you spending any more money beyond your insurance premium. So it's all part of the dialogue, but we certainly can help with that.
Any other questions?
Are you guys seeing startup companies in the tech world address this? Or they
Yeah.
don't have enough funding yet
It's-
to really?
Yeah, it's challenging to, you're talking about underwriting the risk, it's difficult, right? Because they may not be generating revenue yet,
Yeah.
or generating a substantial amount of revenue to have an adequate premium or deductible level. But they still have significant amount of exposure, so they may
Right.
have 25 million records, but they're barely making money. So how do we, the insurance company, get comfortable with the risk and come to a place where they're able to pay us an appropriate premium and retention? So that is one of the challenging, the very large, complex, trying to build large programs, and the startup world where the revenue and the exposure is not in step.
But
So there's
Very
no-
challenging.
But tech startups are 100% buying it. I mean, that's conversation.
So they are paying the price.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think a lot of their
Yeah.
investors are insisting about it.
Yeah.
It's what D&O was 10 years ago. They're not giving them that seed money until they know they're buttoned up on things like this.
Yeah.
Well, I again want to be respectful of your time. I want to thank our panel, Tracy and Patrick and Rahul, so thank you very much. I thought they did a great job.